The waitress who ran toward danger, the steel rod, came down fast, aimed at the most powerful man in the city and the 19-year-old girl standing beside him. Guests scattered like startled birds. The bodyguards froze, just a half-second too slow. Only one person moved toward the danger instead of away from it. She was 27, thin, still in her worn uniform, in flats with the heels rubbed down to nothing. The same woman who'd been scolded just 10 minutes earlier for dropping a tray. She shoved the young girl clear and threw her own back into the blow. Bone cracked against marble. As she crumpled, pulling the stranger tight against her chest, she whispered one thing. "Don't be afraid. I'm here now." The man in the black suit, jaw faintly scarred, eyes the color of wet slate, a man who had never once needed to be afraid, dropped to his knees beside her. Damian Cross ran this city. He gave orders that ended lives with a single nod. But tonight, for the first time, he couldn't make sense of what he'd just watched. Why would someone with nothing trade her life for a stranger who owed her nothing back? Her name was Elena Marsh. And to understand why she ran toward the danger instead of away from it, we have to rewind a few hours before the night broke open into screams. Earlier that evening by 6 o'clock, as the sunset stretched gold across the windows of the Gilded Anchor, Elena was already deep into her second shift of the day, the one nobody else wanted, the one she'd asked for anyway, even though her shoes had worn through at the heel and every step now rubbed raw skin. She didn't complain. She'd stopped complaining a long time ago. Folded into quarters in her apron pocket, tucked behind her order pad, was a hospital bill she'd read so many times she knew every number by heart. Beneath the total, a line in bold reminded her that a surgery could not wait much longer. A surgery for the small, weak heart beating in the chest of her 9-year-old brother, Theo. Every time her hand brushed that paper, his face rose in front of her. That pale smile every morning before she left. That soft voice, telling her not to work too hard. In her wallet was a photo, its edges gone soft from handling. Theo on the steps of their cramped apartment, arms wrapped around a stuffed bear missing half its fur. That afternoon, she'd sat across a desk at the bank, hands clenched in her lap, while a loan officer explained, politely, coldly, that her application had been denied. It was the last door she had left to knock on. She'd been everywhere, signed everything, begged with whatever pride a person has left after doing it enough times. They looked at a waitress's pay stub, at the debt already stacked up, and shook their heads. They didn't see the nights she sat awake by Theo's bed, listening to him struggle for breath. They didn't see the mother who died when Elena was 18, or the father who drank himself out of both their lives without a goodbye. They only saw numbers. And the numbers said she couldn't be trusted. She walked out dry-eyed. She'd cried herself empty years ago. Tears were a luxury she no longer spent. On her way to work, she stopped at her neighbor's apartment, pressed a little cash into the woman's hand for watching Theo, and kissed his forehead while he slept. She never told him about the loan. To Theo, she was always the sister who found a way, who smiled and said it would all be fine. She couldn't have known that in just a few hours, this ordinary, exhausting shift would become the night her life collided with the most powerful man in the city. The manager that evening's important reservation had the manager, Frank Doyle, more wound up than usual. Doyle was in his 50s, hair slicked back, his suit stretched a little too tight over a thickening frame, with a habit of mistaking contempt for authority. To him, servers weren't people, they were tools, meant to be invisible unless a glass needed refilling. He seemed to enjoy aiming that contempt at Elena specifically. Maybe because she was the least likely to push back. Because she needed the job more than anyone. She was clearing a table when Doyle swept past and stopped at a small red wine stain on the cloth. Not her fault. A guest had spilled it minutes before, and she hadn't yet had time to change it. "You call this service?" he said, loud enough to turn heads at the next table. "Mr. Doyle, the guest just spilled it." I was about to change the cloth. He wasn't listening. He leaned in, his voice dropping to something worse than shouting. "Do you know who's sitting here tonight? Or is your head only big enough to count your tips?" A few quiet laughs rippled from nearby tables. Elena's face burned, not from the stain, but from being looked at like a mistake that needed correcting. She lowered her head, not because she believed she was wrong, but because she'd learned that was the cheapest way to let the storm pass. "I'm sorry. I'll fix it right away." "One more time," Doyle said, folding his arms, "and I'll take it out of your pay. Or find someone who actually knows how to work. There's a line of people who'd kill for this job." He had no idea what every dollar of that pay meant to her, that every threat to dock her wages was a threat against the fragile hope folded away in her apron pocket. She nodded, apologized again, and turned to reset the table with hands that trembled, just slightly. She would not cry here. Not in front of him. Not in front of the diners who'd already gone back to their meals. As if watching someone's dignity get ground down was simply part of the evening's ambience. Maybe that was the saddest part. Not Doyle's cruelty, but the room's indifference. She didn't know that a pair of gray eyes in the corner had watched the entire thing. A man used to giving orders, not just observing them. Studying her with an expression he didn't recognize on his own face. The reservation, the doors opened, and a subtle shift moved through the room. The kind everyone feels but nobody can name. The man who walked in was tall, in a perfectly tailored black suit, unhurried but certain. Staff near the entrance stepped aside without being asked. The hostess, sharp with guests just a moment ago, suddenly bowed her head. Even Doyle straightened his tie and rushed over with a smile Elena had never seen him wear. This was Damien Cross. Elena didn't know his name, but she understood instantly. He was the kind of man the world made room for. Tonight, though, he wasn't here as that man. He was here as an older brother. Beside him walked a 19-year-old girl, dark hair loose over her shoulders, a smile that had never touched anything dark. His sister, Lily. It was her birthday. He'd booked this table weeks ago and done something his people considered reckless. No security detail. Only Vera, the woman who moved beside him like a shadow, seated a few tables away. Vera had objected. Taking Lily out with light protection was an unnecessary risk, she'd said, in her flat, careful voice. Damien had shaken his head. He wanted his sister to have one ordinary evening, to laugh in a nice restaurant like any other teenager, without feeling like a hostage in her own life. Lily was all he had left of the world before everything fell apart. He'd sacrificed pieces of himself he sometimes didn't recognize in the mirror, so she could grow up safe and still keep the innocence he'd lost too early. For her, he was willing to lower his guard, just for one night. At the table, he sat relaxed on the surface, but his eyes never stopped working, scanning exits, measuring the distance to the kitchen, sorting every face in the room into threat or not threat. That was how he'd survived. And then his eyes stopped, not on an exit, but on a thin waitress across the room, the one he'd just watched get humiliated. Lily followed his gaze and softened. That waitress looked so sad. I hope they leave her alone tonight. He didn't answer. Something small and unfamiliar had shifted in his chest. The table fate, with its usual cruelty, put Elena on their table. She had no idea who he was and didn't care to guess. To her, he was just another table to get right, so Doyle wouldn't have another excuse. She greeted them with the smile that had become reflex, and Lily answered with a warmth rare among the guests here, chattering about her order, laughing through a story about school, and in the middle of some gesture, knocked her glass, sending water sliding across the table, splashing Elena's sleeve. "Oh no, I'm so sorry, I'm so clumsy." Across the room, Elena saw Doyle's head turning toward them, eyes already hunting for a mistake. Before he could reach any conclusion, she stepped in front of it. "I'm sorry, I wasn't careful with the water. I'll clean it right up." Lily stared at her, stunned. Once Doyle looked away, she whispered, "Why did you take the blame?" "That was me." "It's fine," Elena said, drying the table. "You're young. You don't need to get yelled at over something this small." Something in that quiet kindness made Lily look at her more closely. As Elena bent to wipe the table, a photo slid from her apron pocket. A thin boy hugging a worn stuffed bear. "Who's this? He's so cute." Elena picked it up, her thumb brushing the boy's face. "That's Theo? My little brother. He's 9. Something about the girl's open warmth, or maybe just the weight of the day finally cracking something loose, made Elena say more than she meant to. "He's had a heart condition since he was born. He needs surgery. I'm trying to save enough." She didn't mention the loan or the sleepless nights. Just, simply, "I just want him healthy enough to run around like other kids." Lily's eyes went bright. He's lucky to have a sister like you. Elena shook her head, tucking the photo away, and said a sentence she had no idea would matter so much later. Every time I see someone young, I see a little of Theo in them. I can't just stand there and watch a kid get hurt, no matter what it costs me. Across the table, Damien set down his wine without drinking it. He'd watched countless people fawn over his sister because of who he was, kindness that always came with a price tag attached somewhere. This woman had nothing to gain from any of it. And still, she'd given his sister something his money had never been able to buy. The warning Elena went back to work carrying a strange warmth from the conversation. And maybe because years of service had trained her eyes to catch small things, she was the only person in the room who noticed something wrong. A man in a server's uniform, easily 40, moved along the edge of the room. Elena had done this job long enough to know what someone comfortable with a tray looked like. This wasn't that. He held it stiffly. Wrong. No name tag. He wasn't heading toward the kitchen or the service station. He was hugging the wall, eyes locked in one direction, Damien and Lily's table. She didn't hesitate. She found Doyle at the wine counter. Mr. Doyle, there's a man in a server uniform who doesn't work here. No name tag, doesn't know how to hold a tray, and he keeps watching that table. Something's wrong. Doyle didn't look at her like someone worth listening to. He looked at her like an inconvenience. What are you making up now? Your job is serving tables, not spying on guests. Please, just have someone check. If I'm wrong, punish me. But if I'm right, if you keep wandering around instead of doing your job, you're fired tonight. Understood? Go. Once again, the one person who'd actually seen the danger was waved off, because she wore a worn uniform and stood at the bottom of the room's hierarchy. Elena froze for a second, heart hammering, then spun and searched the crowd. Her stomach dropped as she saw the man pull a steel rod from beneath his tray and lunge toward the table where Lily sat laughing, unaware. After that, there was only one thought left driving her feet. After when the sound of the blow had barely faded, and Elena lay on the floor with Lily locked in her arms, the room dissolved into chaos. In the middle of it, Vera moved like she'd been waiting her whole life for exactly this. The attacker pinned to the floor in seconds, the rod skidding across the marble. She looked to Damien for the order. By the rules of his world, a man who touched his sister didn't get to walk away. For one raw second, rage told him exactly what to do. But he didn't want police. Didn't want questions leading anywhere near the life he'd spent years hiding. He gave a small signal, and his people moved the man out through the back, to a place only they knew. His fate undecided, for now. Then Damien turned and looked down at the woman on the floor, pale, still curled protectively around his sister. He knelt, something he had never done for another person in his life. On the ground beside her was a photo that had slipped from her apron, a thin boy with an old stuffed bear. He remembered, in fragments, what he'd overheard. A 9-year-old brother, a weak heart, a sister scraping together every dollar. This woman had nothing, and she'd put her back between a stranger and a weapon anyway. Not because she knew who he was. Not for anything in return. The ambulance took her away. Damien stood there with the photo in his hand, feeling something he had no name for, because for years he'd lived in a world where every kindness came with a price tag, and here was someone who'd given hers away for free. Something inside him, long since turned to stone, began to crack. And through the crack, something unfamiliar quietly slipped in. The morning after at dawn, Damien returned to the Gilded Anchor, not as a guest this time. Doyle's voice reached him from across the room, thick with false outrage, already rewriting the story for a group of staff. That Marsh woman abandoned her post, caused a scene, terrified the guests. I'm terminating her, effective immediately. There's no room here for people like that. Damien walked in, and the room went quiet. Doyle's face flipped instantly, from arrogance to fawning recognition. Mr. Cross, what an honor. What can I? The woman you just called a troublemaker took a blow meant for my sister last night, Damien said, his voice low, more frightening than any shout. She's the reason my sister is alive this morning. Where were you? Doyle stammered. Damien stepped closer. I hear an employee warned you about a suspicious man last night. You dismissed her. You had the chance to stop everything, and you were too busy looking down on her to listen. He finished, quiet and final. Ms. Marsh isn't fired. And if I hear you've made her life difficult one more time, you'll be wondering whether this restaurant still belongs to its current owners." On his way out, he stopped in the kitchen, where an older cook told him, unprompted, about the girl who'd worked there for years, mother gone young, father who vanished, a little brother with a bad heart, 2 shifts a day, and still not enough. "She's a good person," the dishwasher added. "Every time Doyle blames the rest of us unfairly, she steps in and takes it. Nobody ever stands up for her." Damien listened and understood that everything worth knowing about this woman wasn't in any file. It was in the way the people around her spoke about her. The refusal. Elena woke in a hospital room already doing math in her head. How much would this cost? How would she cover rent if she couldn't work? Would her own bill eat the money saved for Theo's surgery? She was fumbling for her phone when the door opened, and the man in the black suit stepped in. "You don't need to worry about any of it," he said. "I've covered the bill, the medicine, the recovery time. Just focus on getting well." For someone drowning in debt, this should have felt like rescue. Instead, her eyes lit with something closer to pride. "I'm grateful, but I can't accept it. I'll manage." He stood there, genuinely thrown. No one had ever said no to him before. "You don't understand. This is nothing to me, and it could change everything for you." "I didn't save her to be paid back," she said. "I did it because it was right. That's all. If I take your money now, what I did last night turns into a transaction. I don't sell my kindness." She paused. "I'm poor. I'm in debt. But the one thing that's still mine is my self-respect. I won't trade that for any price." He looked at her, a woman with nothing in her hands, holding something he'd lost long ago without even noticing it was gone. He wasn't offering out of pity anymore. He wanted to be near whatever this was. He nodded, and something like respect settled into him. The boy named Theo later, alone in his office over the harbor, the photo of Theo still on his desk, her words kept circling back. "Self-respect is the one thing I won't trade." It reached a place in him sealed off since he was 15, a boy who once believed life was a straight road to good things. He remembered his mother's bread in the morning, his father's voice at dinner, his baby sister's first cries. Then, one night, his parents were killed in a bloody dispute between rival factions fighting over the harbor, a family that never belonged to that world, caught in it anyway. He woke up with nothing but a 3-year-old sister crying in his arms, and a helplessness he swore he'd never feel again. He built himself into someone untouchable, piece by piece, entering the very world that had taken his parents. Not out of greed, but because it was the only road an empty-handed boy could walk, to make sure no one could ever take anything from him again. He became the man the whole city bowed to. The price was that he no longer remembered the last time he'd believed anyone was simply good. And now, a woman with nothing was doing exactly what he'd sworn to do at 15, fighting for someone she loved, without losing herself in the process. Theo's surgery. Days later, Theo was transferred to the same hospital, prepped for the surgery Elena had been fighting for. She didn't know exactly how the obstacles had disappeared, but she had a guess. The night before surgery, Theo lay curled up scared, clutching his worn bear, whispering about the machines and the cold room. Elena held his hand, trying to swallow her own fear enough to smile for him. Then the door opened, and Lily walked in with colored paper and pencils, having asked the nurses for permission. She sat beside Theo like they'd known each other for years. "When I was your age, I was in the hospital too. My brother taught me a secret. Draw the place you want to go when you're better, and the fear gets smaller." Theo drew a ship, a pier, seagulls, his dream of going to the harbor with his sister without running out of breath. Lily added a cloud, a sun, and before long his laugh filled the room, a sound Elena hadn't heard in a long time. Two kids from opposite ends of the world, finding each other in the plainest language there is. The truth comes out walking down a hospital corridor. Elena passed a half-open door and heard Vera's calm voice discussing the harbor, men who'd been dealt with, orders that needed following. Through the gap, she saw two men lower their heads as Damien walked past. Every scattered piece locked into place. The way the restaurant had bowed to him, the way the attacker vanished without police, the invisible hand behind Theo's hospital transfer. The man who'd helped her wasn't just wealthy. He ran something dark. That night, after Theo's successful surgery, she pulled Damien into the hallway, away from her sleeping brother. I know who you are now. I know what you do. He didn't deny it. You've helped us more than I can ever repay, and I'll be grateful forever. But I can't let Theo grow up near that world, a world where violence can fall out of nowhere. I lost my parents. I've seen what this life costs. The only thing I live for is keeping him safe, keeping him believing there's still good in the world. I can't trade that, even for the person who saved us. He said nothing because she wasn't wrong. The man in the dark, her words followed him for days, until he finally faced the attacker his people were still holding near the harbor. You don't recognize me, the man said. Marcus Webb, you ruined my life years ago. He told Damien about the gang war, about a younger brother, 20 years old, never hurt anyone, killed in the crossfire of a war between men like them. He died because of wars fought by people like you. I lived every day since with one thought: make you feel what I felt. Take what you love the way I lost what I loved. Damien saw, in Marcus's bitterness, a mirror of his own past, a cycle where violence only manufactured more violence. His people confirmed the last piece. Elena really had warned Doyle that night, and he'd thrown the warning away out of contempt. Doyle lost everything soon after: his job, his polished reputation, the false authority he'd mistaken for real power. But none of that satisfied Damien. The real question Marcus had put in front of him wouldn't leave: keep walking a road that turned one tragedy into countless more, or be the one who finally stopped. The choice that night: he returned to the room. By the only rules he'd ever lived by, the answer was simple: a man who touched his sister didn't get to walk away. His hand found the weapon at his side. He looked at Marcus, who looked back without begging, like a man who'd been waiting a long time for this to end. And then Marcus's face blurred, and Damien saw himself at 15. Saw Lily's eyes. Saw Theo's ship drawing. Heard Elena's voice. If you end his life, you won't end anything. He had a brother he loved too. And somewhere out there, someone else might come looking for you, carrying the same hate you're holding right now. Violence has never been a period. It's only a comma. The only one who can end the story is whoever's brave enough to put the weapon down first. His hand began to shake, not from fear, but because for the first time, he was fighting himself. He thought of every other Marcus his world had made, and understood. Tighten his grip once more, and he'd never be free of it. Slowly, he lowered his hand. I won't take your life, he told Marcus. Not because you don't deserve consequences. Because I'm tired of being the reason more pain gets made. You'll answer for this, but in front of a judge, not me. He turned to Vera. Hand him over to the authorities. Anonymously, through proper channels, nothing traced back to us. Let real justice handle it. In that moment, Damien Cross, the man the whole city bowed to, felt free for the first time in 20 years. After Theo's surgery had already succeeded by then, his heart finally strong. Elena had cried. Real tears, the first in years, when the surgeon delivered the news. In the months after, everything shifted. Damien began dismantling, piece by piece, the world that had held him for 2 decades, moving his resources into legitimate work. He started a foundation to help working families caring for someone seriously ill, the kind of family the world usually looks straight through. He didn't make Elena a recipient of his charity. He asked her to run it, because no one understood what those families needed better than she did. Elena Marsh, once scolded, once invisible, became the person who reached out and lifted others up, seen and respected for exactly what she'd always been worth. The harbor on a late autumn afternoon, both families walked out to the harbor Theo had once only drawn on paper. He ran along the pier with Lily, cheeks flushed and healthy, their laughter mixing with the gulls over gold water. Elena and Damien stood watching them. She thought back to the night she'd whispered, "Don't be afraid, I'm here now," and looked at the man beside her, once alone inside his own fortress, now brave enough to set it down. "You're safe now too," she said. He understood, finally, that the safety she meant wasn't about bodies or bodyguards. It was the quiet of a person who'd stopped running from what they used to be. Standing there in the light off the water, 2 people from opposite worlds had found something neither money nor power could buy: peace, trust, and something like home.